It's the 50th anniversary of Ali Liston 2. We are making the rounds here on ESPN.com. Jim Basquil alongside Brian Campbell, soon to be joined by your podcast partner, Grantland's Rafe Bartholomew. He was a brash 22-year-old named Cassius Clay when he first beat Sonny Liston in February of 1964, when the then champ never made it out of his corner for the 7th round. The rematch came in May of 1965 when the new champ, known as Muhammad Ali, won in the first round with what was known as the Phantom Punch, resulting in one of the most iconic sports images of all time. Ali stood over the fallen Liston, yelling, "Get up and fight, sucker!" Brian, this sure reeked of a fixed fight. What have you learned about this surprising finish?
You know, in boxing's sordid history of sort of these bizarre finishes, this one stands out even above the rest, you know, for the location and for the finish. You know, it's called the Phantom Punch because everyone at ringside really didn't see it land. It was such a short right hand. But really, as bizarre as sort of the punch that led to the finish was the way that the finish was handled. You really have to look at referee Jersey Joe Walcott, the Hall of Famer, former heavyweight champion, who really just botched the finish of this, was unable to get Muhammad Ali into a neutral corner, never picked up the count from the timekeeper. You had Liston down for between 15 and 20 seconds. As he's talking to the timekeeper, the two fighters, they're fighting again. Suddenly, you know, Walcott's jumping in to call off the fight. Very sketchy ending, a punch that really didn't seem like it had the type of power to end this. And it just really was par for the course and just a bizarre event overall that, you know, stands the test of time in history.
I know Ali says he stings like a bee, but that didn't seem like a sting to me. Yeah, and Jersey Joe needed to do a better job there. Rafe Bartholomew is the co-host of the Ropes podcast with Mr. Brian Campbell. Rafe, this was the only heavyweight title fight fought in the state of Maine. The venue was the Central Maine Youth Center in Lewiston, Maine, a 4,900 seating arena capacity, which only had just over 2,400 fans in attendance. What were the circumstances behind this rather odd venue, as well as the low turnout?
Well, thanks, Jimmy. It comes back to what Brian was mentioning, sort of the sordid history of boxing and Sonny Liston's reputation in particular, right? I mean, he had been rumored to be involved with organized crime for years already. I mean, famous mafia figures had once owned were his promoters. The fight had been scheduled in Boston, and the commission in Massachusetts got so worried about organized crime rumors that they just dropped it. With less than 3 weeks before the fight was scheduled, the promoters were just desperate to get it anywhere, and Lewiston, Maine stepped up and said, "We'll do it." And that made the promotion pretty difficult in about 19 days. The venue had no marquee to even put the fighters' names on it. It's a pretty crazy story, and the fight that ended up being almost as weird, or actually weirder probably, than the story of how it ended up there.
Absolutely. Lewiston, Maine, Brian. Lewiston, Maine for a heavyweight. Muhammad Ali is fighting in Lewiston, Maine. It's crazy.
Imagine how Twitter would have adjusted to that.
Unbelievable. This is like the Bristol YMCA having a fight. Brian, 3 years later, Ali refused to be drafted for the Vietnam War, citing his religious beliefs. He was eventually found guilty of draft evasion and stripped of his title, ultimately regained in 1974. But why was this second fight with Liston significant from a historical perspective?
Well, I think historically it stands out the most because of how bizarre it was. You talk about sort of the fan man dropping in and the Bo Holyfield. We've seen Mike Tyson bite Holyfield. This one was much more bizarre and sort of the way, because the heavyweight title was on the line. It ended so early in such a bizarre location. But what it did was give Ali a chance to leave no doubt coming off of that first fight, which was really a little bit sketchy in itself, you know, with Ali having the substances in his eyes for a couple rounds there, with Liston sort of quitting with the shoulder injury out of nowhere when it looked like he can continue. And this fight as well. Oddly enough, Liston coming in as the 13-5 favorite. So if you're going to build a case, Jim, in where we look at this fight historically because of the sketchiness, did Liston take a fall? You know, there's a lot of rumors that went with that through the years. People that claim that at the end of Liston's life that he admitted that he had mafia debts that he had to pay off. There was also a lot of cultural stuff going on here with the Nation of Islam, which Ali was a part. Malcolm X was assassinated before that. Heavy security around this fight leading up to it. I think that's why you had the smaller amount of attendance there in that small arena. A lot that you can look at this fight where you can shake your head at, but you know, it goes down in history as another one of those. That's boxing.
You can make a strong case that both those fights, from Liston's perspective, were falls. Both.
Well, and I think that's why Ali stood over him, said, "Get up." I think he knew that
taken off guard.
Look good. It
taken off guard. Yeah. Hey, Rafe, we talk so much here about legacy, so much about these fighters, the all-time great fighters. What's their legacy? How did the two fights against Ali impact Liston's legacy?
Well, sure. I mean, they turned Liston from a guy who, after he, knocked out Floyd Patterson in the first round in back-to-back fights to claim the heavyweight title and then defend it, a guy who looked like, one of the scariest man in the world, both in the ring and outside in some cases. And, a destroyer, and he was a 7-1 favorite against Ali the first time, and he was a 13-5 favorite, like Brian just said, in the rematch after he'd lost. So after losing those fights, he became more of an oddity. Less, he kept fighting, but he never really stepped up to an elite level again, and he became more known as someone with a tragic figure almost in boxing, or some guy who is more involved with organized crime and this sordid lifestyle than as a fighter. We really don't know, I think, how good his career could have been, and that, I guess, is due to circumstances and decisions he made, and it followed him all the way up to his death when he was just 40 years old. That it's still sort of mysterious circumstances surrounding that.
Yeah, mysterious circumstances surrounding the death as well. Absolutely, absolutely. Ali Liston 2, 50 years ago, a night that catapulted the career of a fighter known as the greatest, torpedoed the career of Liston, who was once considered a feared champion. We are making the rounds only on the boxing page of ESPN.com. For Rafe Bartholomew and Brian Campbell, I'm Jim Basquil.